Welcome to this edition of Wealth Coherence.
My brother had been diagnosed at a young age with diabetes. My father was diagnosed later in life with diabetes. And at the time, there were not a lot of resources for families of children with diabetes. And so the idea of this chapter was born out of the need to not feel like you were in isolation, to meet with other families, similar circumstances. And so, now seeing that all these years later, it was a need that they saw for themselves and that needed to be fulfilled. And I think that's how a lot of organizations come about, right? Is this unmet need.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the boards that my dad served on, I would hear about them from time to time. Sometimes it was a university board or the Jewish Federation board, and I would hear stories, and again, always very much in alignment with who I knew my father to be and what he cared about. And so there really was not much question about this was also coherent for my parents and what they were doing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking about like when I grew up, how giving showed up in my life, just listening to you and thinking about that. And I remember like one of my earliest memories is having that little orange UNICEF box that we would take on Halloween. And it was like a given that you were going to actually get coins that were going to be given to children that could never go trick-or-treating. Like this, like we have so much abundance here. And I don't think that happens anymore. Or if it does, I haven't seen them in a long time. Like, do children still have those little boxes? Or
I don't know if they do. JDF actually did something similar. They had orange cans around the same time of year.
Oh, interesting.
And I think that those sorts of ideas have morphed over time.
I'm wondering, was it now like an app with a QR code or something? Like, I'm wondering how kids relate to giving and receiving. Like now, if you've encountered different ways that parents really infuse this idea of giving and giving back with their children.
Yeah, I think you see it in like at the grocery store. There are often these programs where you round up, like you round up and you give, or they ask you specifically, like at Costco, they do a fundraiser every year for the Children's Miracle Network, I believe. And they have the hot air balloon
oh yeah, I've seen
things
those
up in the store. And so one time I was there with my son recently and he was asking me about what are these about, and I said, they'll ask us for a donation. So I think the idea is still there, but it's more over time of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's another way to also have that discernment. Like we're, as a family, we choose to give based on organizations that we've chosen to, and I want to tell you about those. So it's wonderful that they have this as a way to do this, but we've already made our decisions about who we're going to give to this year, so that there's that container for it, because it can really help, because you can feel this pull to like give in the moment, and it can be really confusing. Like you look at your bank statement at the end of the month, or your accountant tells you how much you've given. It's like, wait, what? Or I've been giving to all these organizations, I didn't know that. So it's having a knowledge about your giving seems really important too.
Yes, and that's part of the process, whether I'm working with an individual or couples, or whether they come through Philanthropy Camp, is let's look at your past 2 years of giving and just see what that tells us in and of itself, and that's a great place to be able to look back and say, this gift makes sense, this gift doesn't make sense. In fact, this is a great example from camp that came up this spring. Was a couple of the women in the group have huge giving lists, and what they started to realize over time was they would give a gift to an organization, maybe in honor of somebody, or in memoriam for somebody. And what would happen is that the next year they'd get a request and they'd feel like they needed to give again. And so as you can imagine, as people die or celebrate things, these lists were becoming sort of out of control in terms of I'm giving. And so sometimes you just need permission, which I feel is like what I've been able to give them through this process, to say it's okay to make a one-time only gift for this specific purpose, and then let that go. Return to what is in alignment for you. And so that's something we talk about too, is can you have the majority of your giving be in alignment with you and what you want to give? And can you have a smaller portion that is for the asks that friends make of you, for the natural disaster that might come up that pulls at your heartstring, for the in honor or in memory of type gifts, so that there's an alignment there, in that it's recognizing somebody that was special to you, or a relationship that was special to you. But it may not be a cause that necessarily calls to you.
Speaks to you. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because it makes me think about being proactive versus reactive. And what you're basically saying is be proactive with like 90% of your giving, and be clear on how much your budget for giving is. And then let 10% be more reactive and responsive to like immediate things. But where you have a sense for that, and it might be 80-20, you can decide, but where you have your own strategic plan for your giving and what a difference that can make. And you made me think of a experience I had with a family recently where it was 4 generations in one room. It was over 30 people. We had them put up on the walls all these different areas of giving that could be like all these different categories of giving, kind of like the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, like it just all these different ones. And then we had them get in small groups, and we had little cards for them to really talk about what areas they've currently given, what do they feel really strongly about individually and as a group. And then we had them kind of get clear on like what their top 3 were for themselves individually. And then we had them get up around the room and stand next to their number one, like, and they'd written on their top 3, they'd written their name on their top 3. So you could look on the walls and see which ones had the most names, which ones had fewer, and it was fascinating because the family was very committed to the Catholic Church, and they were all Catholic, and religious institutions was one of the places you could give. And it was completely blank. Like nobody had chosen that. And yet that was where the majority of the family's resources were going in their philanthropy. And it was very surprising to them, and it sparked a really important conversation for them. And what had happened, and what they realized was the matriarch and patriarch were aging, and they were having some dementia issues, and the needs of the elderly had suddenly become really important to them in their community, because they became aware of it, much like what you said about the diabetes, and that the community was really underserved with that. And so that page was the most filled, the most people were standing over there, and they hadn't given any money to it. And so they really got a chance to assess, where are we now, where have we been, and then how do we want to recalibrate and continue to honor our religion and what matters to us, but maybe to a lesser degree. Or maybe we've given, let's look at how much we've given over time, and do we feel like we're complete there and we want to do something else. But just to come to that place of restructuring your strategic planning as we grow and change and as the world changes, right?
Yes, this is such a powerful example, Emily. And I think that this last point, to be flexible, is really important. And I frame it, especially during philanthropy camp, I frame this as a journey. You're not going to be deciding this one time and this is now set in stone for the rest of your life. No, you decide now and you revisit it on whatever basis makes sense to you. Is it an annual basis? Is it every 6 months? Is it, every couple of years? Because yes, our values change, circumstances change, our commitments change. And you're right, sometimes things that are becoming present and top of mind for a family overtake what used to be seen as something of importance. And we're also seeing, just to put a little sort of larger lens on this, we are seeing that the numbers for the Giving USA report for last year was just recently released in the past couple of weeks. And we're seeing over time that giving to religion has continued to decrease over time. And it's often for these reasons is matriarchs and patriarchs in the family are the ones who are more tied to religion. And as you get to the rising gen below them, their connection to the church may not be as strong as mom and dad's or grandma and grandpa's. And so that desire to give to the church goes by the wayside.
Oh, that's so interesting because it really makes you think about legacy and, all the things that have brought the family or the individual to where they are now. And then looking forward to kind of fully expressing individual core values and in relationship to if it's family resources that you're giving, and what does that look like? And I do think it's important when people are thinking about their giving strategy and their policies for their foundations or even for their donor advised funds to build in a little bit of that flexibility, because acknowledging that things can change. If you're really rigid about what you give to and what it needs to look like, the world could be quite different for that next generation or the generation after. And you want to create some of that flexibility. And I'm thinking about things that, because it makes it so difficult. Like the Barnes Foundation, I think I think it's in the Philadelphia area. Was it Barnes?
Oh.
I'll have to look. But they had a very strong stipulation that it had to be in a certain location that was actually very expensive and difficult for people to get to, and they had to do a lot to change the bylaws of that nonprofit to move it into downtown Philadelphia where everybody could have access to it. And now the collection's a phenomenal collection, and now people are getting to see it and access it in ways they never could have before. So that's like one example of how if you're too rigid, it can maybe make things difficult in the future.
From my experience, the families that I work with are wanting to have that flexibility built in. I just wrapped up a couple of years work with a family at the end of last year. And when we were talking about their mission in particular, they wanted to keep it broad, the definition of underserved broad, because they didn't know what would surface for them around this. And they have a sibling who has Down syndrome. And so that had been so much of the family's focus. And while that was still important to them, they wanted to acknowledge that there are other underserved populations that might speak to them. And in fact, they did, because when the kids came to the decision-making meeting and they each brought their own proposals to the table, it was so beautiful that they each had something that was, here we go with the coherence, that was in alignment with who they were as individuals and was in alignment of this overarching larger vision of the family. And it was just so beautiful to see, and that they really honored that. One of the siblings brought to the table a greenhouse for an organization that works with adults with disabilities. And all the siblings agreed. They said, your proposal is so you're the outdoors person, this is so great. And everybody saw that in their brother, and it spoke to them so much. They said, we want to fully fund that project. And then other siblings were saying, I'll take less for the organization that I proposed so that we can make sure that you have, it was just beautiful to see what happens. I'm getting chills actually talking about
it too. And I just think it'd be great to pause for a second, because I think that's a great example of heart coherence. You don't have to physically be with someone. We're in completely different cities. Anybody who's listening to this, I mean, that was a authentic heart moment, right? In terms of that young man came so forward with what meant something to him, asked the family to consider fully funding something that was so meaningful to him. And because it was so in alignment with who he was, the whole family was in alignment with supporting it fully. I mean, that just brings tears to my eyes. And that's what's possible when we have that level of coherence as an individual and in a family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic
Absolutely.
story.
Absolutely.